So as you know, like last week, we have the progress tracking that it's mandatory and it's very important. GPS sends reminders on a McGill email. Please check your email. 2 incomplete progress tracking forms could be result in a failure, and you don't want that. So the next will be regarding the who. Once you know that you're pursuing a medical school or residency along with your graduate program, or you get accepted into medical school and residency while you are pursuing your graduate program, please inform us to make everything run smoothly. We also advertise the ESGSS Welcome Back event. Please contact Muskan Alad for more details. Registration is required. Please do the communication only through McGill emails. Do not use your personal, only the McGill, and include in your McGill ID in communication with us. It's much easier for us. And we get back to the progress tracking. Please complete the progress tracking forms when you had your meeting and upload it in My Progress for us to update your file. Thank you. Now, Faxen.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you everyone for joining the seminar. Some of you have heard Mr. James Mehta before, and we have got new students. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce Mr. Mehta, who holds an MBA from Concordia University and also a bachelor's in mechanical engineering from McGill. So basically his journey through the realms of R&D, aerospace, and health tech startup is quite very impressive. He's as a former program manager at the Injury Repair Recovery Program at the MUHC, he played a vital role in launching the Clinical Innovation Platform, which is a pioneering effort in health tech, which furthering adding to his accolades. Some of you have been to the 9th floor of the MGH, where we have the CLIP platform. Mr. Mehta has been involved. He was also involved in the clinical innovation for those students who are in innovation. So he served as the Associate Director of Stakeholder Relations for NeuroHub, which is a groundbreaking software developed by McGill's top neuroscientists. Today, as a technology transfer manager, he champions the protection and commercialization of intellectual property from McGill's brilliant researchers. So his expertise basically spans all the way from engineering technologies to medical devices. So you'll be hearing some wonderful things about IP. I remember when I first joined McGill as an assistant professor, very eager to publish everything new that we find. And I remember we had something in plasma physics with Ecole Polytechnique, and I went to present in Germany. And as I was giving the presentation, somebody in the audience said, "Have you protected that?" And by that time, it was quite too late. So hopefully things like that won't happen to you since you have Mr. Mehta giving you some tips of how to go about. So thank you, James, for agreeing to come and talk to us.
Sorry, I was muted there, but thanks so much for that warm welcome. It's really great to be back. I see already some familiar faces in this virtual crowd and some new ones, obviously. So yeah, my name is James. I'm going to be giving you an overview of intellectual property as well as the technology transfer office at McGill. So first, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what our office does, and then we're going to dive into more concepts into what intellectual property is and how can you protect it. So our office is a part of the Office of Innovation and Partnerships. We're basically split into 3 teams. There's one team called Industry Liaisons, They're really there to build and maintain a positive relationship with industry partners. For our team, we do technology transfer, so that's licensing and protection of intellectual property. And then we have another team that does more of the industry-specific research agreements. We have a pretty diverse team. We have people who are engineers like myself, all the way to PhDs in life science to chemists. So there's a great, diverse expertise, and this gives us really a good base load here to handle many types of inventions. And we also have one person who's really dedicated just to do patent searches. So essentially what we do in a nutshell is that we help McGill researchers and inventors protect their intellectual property, and then we license them out to industry or potentially their own startups. We work a lot with industry liaisons who are more the connection point with companies, because they bring in new research grants, which then lead to new inventions, which then we spin out even more. And really what we're going to be talking about today is just the technology push, as I like to call it, to the industry. So we have basically 3 services that we provide the community. The first being financial support. So I want you to think of us as actually your first investor. So when you have a piece of intellectual property, before your friends or your families are going to invest in it, McGill will. So we'll pay for all the patenting costs, which can get really, really expensive. And we also provide you access to exclusive funding opportunities. These are both external, like with federal funding agencies, as well as internal ones, like the McGill Innovation Fund, as well as the Clinical Innovation Competition. We'll also help evaluate your technology. So like I said, we have one person who does patentability searches, and they're able to provide expertise on how to best protect your research and to make sure it's actually worth it to put your time and our money into it. And we'll also advise you on what really the next steps that need to be done in order to make it attractive to the market. And then we find licensees for your technology, we negotiate agreements, and then we handle payment and disbursement. So now let's get into intellectual property and the different forms of intellectual property protection. So intellectual property is any product of human intellect. So it's any non-abstract ideas that is unique, novel, non-obvious, and valuable. Not all IP can be protected, but there's different types of patent protection, intellectual property protection. So you have utility patents, which I think a lot of people are very knowledgeable of. You have copyright, trade secrets, know-how, and then there's a couple other ones like plant patents that are a bit more specific. There's trademarks like the McGill brand and things like that. But really the 4 that we typically deal with are utility patents, copyright, and then trade secrets and know-how. So a patent, it's a lot of people describe it as a legal monopoly. It's not really that. It's an exclusive right to use a technology for commercial purposes. And what it does is it gives you 20 years where you're going to be the only person to exploit that technology. However, the quid pro quo is that you have to disclose to everybody. So after that 20-year time period, anyone can use it and take advantage of it. Patents are really expensive, and mostly because they're national in scope, which means that you have to patent protect in every individual country. And the more countries you patent in, the more expensive they are. Here's some examples on what can be patented. So you could have a product, like a physical device, a medical device, a structure, but you can also patent compositions of matter, which could be a molecule, a drug, or a mixture of ingredients. And something as well, you can also patent a process or even the use of a specific device for a certain application. So for the process, it could be like a process to manufacture something. It can also be used like for instance, using a particular drug to cure a certain disorder. So you can actually have several different types of patent protection claims within one patent, and it can also be an improvement of a previous patent as long as it's sufficiently novel. In terms of copyright protection, most people like to think of it as music and software and literature, but actually copyright can also apply to software. So and what's good about copyright is it's automatic. As soon as it's created, you have copyright protection. although you can register them for a very small fee. So for most software out there, especially at McGill, we just let the copyright take over, and as long as you don't tell anybody what your code is, and you can actually license that pretty easily. For AI, it's a bit more complicated. So AI is evolving faster than the law is. Some AI algorithms are patentable because there's something that's really unique and novel. Some of them are just advanced automation systems, so you can't really patent that, and they're covered under copyright. Another thing to note is that the products of an AI algorithm may not be protectable. There's some landmark legislation in the last few years saying that, for instance, OpenAI products are not patentable. So if you create an AI generated image, and something that's really very poignant for medical technology is that what type of data set you use may not be you may not be allowed to commercialize the products of that data as well. So for digital health, you have to be really cognizant of what kind of data sets you use. In terms of trade secrets, this could really be anything that's secret. So your unpatented invention that you haven't disclosed to anybody yet. It could be formulas, some designs, but it could also be IP that you just don't want to be bound by the 20-year life period of a patent. So a very famous example of this is Coca-Cola. So the recipe for Coca-Cola can be patented very easily, but they don't want that because then they go to business in 20 years. They want to be in business for 200, 2,000 years, so they keep it secret. So most processes, most methods by the logic are actually not patented for that very reason. But in the case of academia, really what we use as know-how very often is a technology or an improvement that may not meet all the eligibility criteria of a patent. So the eligibility criteria being it has to be novel. So that's something that's very unique, but also something that hasn't been disclosed. So unfortunately, like Faxon mentioned, if you go to a conference and you talk about it, you're now disclosing it and it's not a new thing. So when you do that, you're actually ineligible to patent in most countries in the world, the exceptions being Canada, the US, and Australia. You also have to have the technology being not obvious. This is a bit more abstract and hard to interpret, but essentially it's anyone that's have ordinary skill in the field that you're in would not know how to do it. So if you have something that's A, that's well known, you have something that's B, that's well known, and you put those together, that might be too obvious to be patented. It also has to work, so you have to prove that it works. So you can, if you have no data to validate it, it's going to be very hard to get patent protection. Enablement, you have to be able to sufficiently disclose what you're inventing. And of course, you have to be the first person to patent. So most countries are on a first to file basis, not a first to invent. So the first person to actually put it in, they're the one who gets the prize. So why do universities care about patents and patent protection? Well, it actually helps increase the public impact of university invention. So without protecting a particular piece of IP, it's very hard to translate it to the market in order to commercialize it. Also, many people may not know this, but 3/4 of all published technical information is found in patents. So it's not in academic journals. They're considered one of the most complete and accessible sources of information worldwide. So if you put a patent out there, you're contributing to literature within the world. Most people check patents, especially if you're a company. They don't really check academic journals. So if you're thinking of a new idea and you want to see if anyone's done it before, please check patents because you may be surprised at how much is there. They also attract sponsors. So a lot of our licensing deals with companies bring in more funding to a specific lab because they want to develop it further. Increases the prestige for faculty and students. So, a lot of you who are students right now, you're actually going to work in industry, and companies care a lot about patents. So being a named inventor on a patent or more can give you a good competitive advantage. And for those who are full-time researchers or want to be full-time researchers, a great track record of translating research to the market through a patent is really good for getting grants. And finally, they make money. So you can license them and you can use them as assets to attract for investors if you want to create a startup. In terms of a timeline on how to get a patent, this is a bit variable, but this is a very common process that we use. Is we first file here, I'll put my cursor here. We first file a provisional application, typically in the United States, and this really gives you 12 months to come up with a full patent, because you can add changes to it afterwards. Oops, sorry. Then we'll file something called a PCT, which is an international patent. And essentially, this allows you to patent in many, many jurisdictions worldwide, usually for a little bit cheaper. However, you don't have to do a PCT. You can actually just skip straight to whatever specific countries you want. But most of the time in academia, you need more time to really figure out if you're going to pursue this or really what countries you want to target. And then finally, at that point, that's when you have to pick all the different countries you have to go in. This is when the costs really jumped astronomically. So typically in technology licensing, we like to license it off like halfway through the PCT. So then the company really decides where they want to go, as opposed to us trying to pick and choose where we hope they would like to patent in. In terms of where should people file, this really depends on the specific technology and what you want to do with it. So do you want to target countries with a very large target market? Do you want to target countries where there's manufacturing located if it's a physical device? Perhaps countries that export a lot, like the European Union, the US, or China, because they manufacture a lot in there. You also have to consider, how is your research or your technology going to evolve and leave room for improvements. So a lot of times you'll make your patent very, very broad, but then you won't be able to protect things that you invent later on. So a lot of valuable patents, they consider what's going on 3 to 5 years down the road when you're going to get a patent. What are your competitors going to be doing? What will you actually be selling? So when it comes to this, if you're commercializing through McGill, a technology transfer manager like yourself will develop and implement an IP strategy for you. If you want to do it on your own, I would consider looking at all these considerations to choose where you want to patent. So I know a lot of you are probably very familiar with academic publications and how they're formatted. If you look at a publication, you'll probably read the abstract and you go straight down to the results. You know exactly what you're looking for. But I bet a lot of you haven't really read a patent and are familiar with how they're structured. So I thought I would go through a little example. And because it's Halloween, I decided to pick a patent for a Halloween tree carrier. Yes, there is one. So all patents look pretty much the same. So you'll have a title here. It'll go on to show you who the inventors are, when it was filed, even has references to other patents that are very similar. And then you'll have an abstract, just like an academic journal with a figure. After that, you'll have drawings. So it'll show different configurations, in this case of a Halloween tree carrier, like if it's square or if it looks like a pumpkin. You'll have the field of the invention as well as the background. So this is kind of like the introduction of an academic journal. Why does it matter? Why do you need to have a tree carrier? Then this is what I consider one of the most important parts, is the summary. And within a few paragraphs, it tells you exactly what the invention is. After that, you'll get a detailed description of what the invention is. And this will go on for pages and pages and pages and pages, and has very, very granular explanations of all the figures and what it is. And usually, unless you're very interested in reading this, you actually quite skip it. And then finally, at the very end, this is where it's the most important. And this is where you have the claims. And the claims are what actually is protected by law and is the meat of the whole patent. So there are essentially two types of claims. You have independent claims and then dependent ones. So independent claims, they're standalone, and dependent claims refer or are connected to an independent claim. So for example, the first claim here is it's a Halloween treat carrier comprising a container having thereon a Halloween design, wherein the container or the Halloween design comprises of glow-in-the-dark material. So it's a carrier, has a Halloween design, and it can be glow-in-the-dark. Then you'll have several dependent claims that add details to this one. So for instance, where the material is reflective. So you can have a configuration where it's glow in the dark and it's reflective, and it'll go on to add more details. Then you have a method claim. So that's like a process or a use, and it's a use of the product where you can create it by actually cutting it out of paper. So this is the use claim. There's two different levels of claims. So you'll notice that this protects the structure or what it actually looks like versus a use. These are very valuable because if someone want to copy this, you could say, "Hey, this is my design. I described it here in detail, and you're infringing my patent." For the method claim, unless you can really prove that they did this in the exact way that you wrote here, it's almost impossible to enforce. So most patents out there are not purely method claims, and they're quite weak in comparison to a specific structure. So now I want to move on onto how tech is transferred at McGill specifically. So we have two policies here at McGill which govern inventions and software, as well as copyright. I would invite you to read them, but if you don't want to read the pages and pages and pages, in a nutshell, the IP policy states that any invention or software invented at McGill is co-owned by the inventors and McGill itself, and applies to anyone at McGill who is working on a research project or is paid by McGill. So this include professors, staff, postdocs, students, including residents, who are working on their thesis, on a research project, or otherwise getting paid by McGill. It does not cover students who are, who come up with the idea on their own, or they do in the course of a course like surgical innovation, where you have to go to the hospital, you have to find an unmet need and create a device. That would be really owned by the students themselves, unless professor is a co-inventor, then it would cover under this policy. So once you have something that's that could be commercialized, there are essentially two paths. So actually there's a third one. The third one is you can publish it and make it freely available to everybody. And you're allowed to do that. But if you want to commercialize it, there's two paths. The first one is McGill commercialize it on your behalf. So the inventors would assign rights to McGill. McGill pays for all the costs, and then we find a licensee for the technology. The second path is that the researchers or the inventors, they do it themselves. So McGill transfers its rights to the inventors. They pay for all the patent costs, or they create a spin-off to provide services or sell the device themselves. No matter what, if you have something you want to commercialize, whether it's through McGill or not, the first step is always to file an invention disclosure with our office. And the information here typically includes, who the inventors are, a detailed description of the invention, why is it novel and non-obvious, so it could be patentable, and usually you have some supporting data. And we like to suggest to people, if you're working on something and you don't know the best time to tell us, usually you want to do it a few months you're ready to publish a paper, because that'll give you enough information in order to us to do a proper patent search. And we'll make a decision and we'll probably patent and protect it before that paper is published, or in the case of a conference, before you go to the conference. So once you file disclosure, well, if you do it too early, there's not really much we can do. If you do it too late, then someone could beat you to patenting or publishing first. But typically with really new innovative research, this is rarely the case. It's mostly the case you're coming to us a bit too early. So you want to balance preparedness and timeliness. Now, unfortunately, McGill doesn't have an unlimited budget to pay for all the patents at McGill. So we do have several criteria to meet before we move ahead. And the first one is likelihood of commercial success. So the old R&D director at 3M once said that research is the transformation of money into knowledge, and innovation is a transformation of knowledge back into money. So along those lines, if a particular technology is not going to have good commercial success, we won't invest into it. We also won't invest into it if we don't have the freedom to operate. So that's if the strength of the patent claims are very narrow or not great, or if your technology couldn't be exploited without relying on previous technology, then it's very hard to commercialize it. We won't move forward for that reason. And finally, the inventor's participation. So filing for a patent and going through the motions of this is actually quite laborious. You have to meet with patent agents. You have to respond to the patent office. So the inventor's participation is really important. If you just want to never see us again, it's very hard to actually commercialize something. And the fifth criteria is if there's any grants that require us to assign it or license to a particular party, then we'll have to do that. So I want to give you a typical example of the process of tech transfer. So first, you'll start off with an idea. You'll probably come up with some sort of proof of principle testing. And then you'll report an invention to our office. And when it comes to us, we'll do an IP evaluation, make sure it's patentable. We'll do a market evaluation, make sure there's a good likelihood of commercial success. And then the patent protection is usually our go, no go gauge. So if yes, then we'll file for a patent. You're free to publish at that time. And then we'll work with you on a development plan to make it attractive to the market, right? So, what kind of validations do you need? Do you need simulation? Do you need preclinical testing? Do you need clinical data? So we'll work with you on that. And then typically when that's done, that's the point of licensing to a company, which will then commercialize it for us. Or if you want to create a startup, McGill will license to your startup. I see something in the chat. I just want to make sure there's no questions. Oh, will these slides be shared after the meeting? Yeah, I'll send it to everybody. So this isn't exactly the case. A lot of times we actually license right after patenting, but I think this is a pretty good example of what to expect in the process. For medical devices, for therapeutics, typically this validation time, it takes a long time because a lot of companies, they want to have some sort of data before they take on the risk of licensing. So unlike software, which we can license pretty quickly, life science, it takes a little bit longer. So if, for those who want to go the startup route, which is very popular now, this is something that we'll fully support. So like I said, McGill will typically license the technology to that startup. There's some exclusive funding opportunities for startups like the McGill Innovation Fund. And we'll license the startup in exchange for equity and royalties. I will say though, we actually took a look at the data for the success of startups over the last 10 years, and they are around an order of magnitude less than licensing to companies. So they are a lot more riskier, but you can get a little bit more money that way. So I would try and balance the risk reward with startups versus the technology licensing. Technology licensing, as it's pretty successful. It doesn't require a lot of upfront costs associated with launching a company, as well as putting all the hours needed to do that. So if McGill commercializes on your behalf, 60% of the revenue generated from a license agreement or an assignment, that'll go directly to the researchers, and then McGill keeps 40% of the revenue. Why does McGill take 40%? Well, this is to offset the costs of capital invested for the patents, the human resources, and to offset some of the salaries and the equipment used to create the IP. If the inventors want to manage commercialization, McGill will sell its portion of rights to the inventors for 20% of the revenue generated. Why 20%? Well, some funds still need to be collected to offset the salaries and equipment used to create that piece of IP. So a lot of the overhead costs don't fully remunerate all the costs associated with a particular piece of research. And for transparency, I want to show this this table of how McGill ranks with other Canadian universities. So as you see, McGill gives 60% of the revenue generated to the inventors, which is comparable to University of Toronto, but all the other Canadian universities generally have a lower percentage to the inventors, except for Waterloo, which doesn't have a tech transfer office like us, so I wouldn't even consider them. And most US universities only give around 30%, 35%, depending on the institution, to the inventors. So I think McGill is actually very competitive when it comes to technology commercialization and to attract people to do that. So I want to cap this presentation off to show some data and takeaways we learned over the past few years for medtech innovation specifically. So if you look at how the market is moving for medical device revenue, it's increasing steadily each year. However, the proportion of what companies spend on their R&D spending is actually going down. So the implication here is that it's harder for medtech companies to design market breakthrough products. And there's a similar trend going on in the pharmaceutical industry as well, but it depends on specific drug types. And the number one reason for this is that the easy stuff has been done. So all the low-hanging fruit has been picked. And what this does is it really gives an opportunity for universities to fill that gap, to invent new devices, which are then licensed to larger companies. And we notice that as well. They're really keen on working with universities to license new technology in. Excuse me. And if you see the effect of this, so over time, the proportion of new inventions reported to our office from the Faculty of Medicine has been increasing quite a lot. Around 46% of all inventions are from the Faculty of Medicine. And moreover, what's not shown here, if you look at the revenue generated from inventions, they're almost always from life science. So there's a huge opportunity here for payback and to commercializing technology. However, as we all know, medtech is very hard, and not everything will get commercialized. And here's some lessons learned we found from licensing. So number one, buyers of medical devices are only incentivized to reduce costs. And this is especially true in single payer healthcare systems. So on the invention side, a lot of technologies need to have a cost leadership positioning, or they have to reduce costs of a customer. And this is really attractive to companies to license in if something that can reduce costs overall. As we all know, the regulatory process is really time and capital intensive. So, all new medtech needs to be better, but also, reducing risk. So this is really attractive for companies. And we also notice that they really only want to license things in after a lot of significant data is obtained. So this is really difficult on a university stage where getting grants for clinical testing is quite difficult. So this gives you a lot of execution risk. So a lot of the times people do startups because it's easier to raise money in order to do that regulatory testing. But if you can do that within an academic environment, it's actually a lot easier and it reduces risk. So I think the key takeaway here is if you have a product that's has good cost positioning, is low risk, and the data can be obtained rather quickly, your chances of getting licensed to a company are extremely high. And it's probably better to do that through a university as opposed to creating a startup. So I want to end here with a slide with a few key takeaways from this presentation. So number one, and I think people in surgical innovation are very good at highlighting this, is that you first need to look at your unmet need and before you create a product. A lot of cases, people create products and they try and find a need for it. So find that unmet need first. How does your technology better address it? Understand the prior art. So what's going to be, what competing products are available? What is being developed right now? And then find ways to de-risk your invention so you can have easier validation. Better outcomes at a lower cost is a great sell, as opposed to having something that's more expensive but a better outcome. It's still possible, but it's harder to commercialize. Finally, when you're working on an academic project in university, keep a list of all the IP you've developed and who's worked on them, because you never know down the line if an idea that you thought of maybe a few years ago, you get some good data to validate it later on. You want to commercialize. And finally, please talk to us before any disclosure, because in academia you hear a lot that it's publish or perish, but in patenting, it's publish and perish. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. That's wonderful. Any questions? Please feel free to either write to the chat or just unmute and ask.
Thank you so much for the great presentation. I just wonder, could you please repeat again when the students should come to you? I got a bit confused about that step.
Sure. So when you first think of an idea, it's a bit too early to come to us. It's usually when you have some sort of proof of principle, an idea that it works, maybe a little bit of a data created, maybe it's enough to publish. So, excuse me. Typically what I like to tell people is if you're 6 months away from publishing a paper, that's the best time to get in contact with us, because then you'll have enough data, enough meat for us to do a proper patent search. If it's just an initial idea, we could do a search, but it may not be sufficient, right? So we might give you something inaccurate. I see a question I'll answer later. So that's why we want you to come to us a little bit later, so then we can do a proper search and we can give you a good feedback on if it's patentable or not. And let me just look at the questions here. And so it says here from
Dr. Labe, we will have the recording uploaded on our website. I'm going to put the link where you can access it probably next week. And regarding the slides, I'll let James respond to you.
Okay. So what input does the patent officer require to search for similar patents? So, we just need like a very detailed description of what the invention is, right? And in comparison to other devices, it really depends on the nature of it. If it's like a new gene therapy, we'll need like a DNA sequence. If it's new, a device, drawings, a description of what it does, that'll be very useful. And then for second question is for AI models to function, they need to be trained on data before you can use them. In the case of medical data, can you shed more light on restrictions of commercialization of AI algorithms that have been trained on health data? It's a really, really great question. So you're right. In academic context, you have access to a plethora of data sets, usually open data sets. But many of them, if not all, they have a restriction that it's for research purposes only. So you can use those to validate that your algorithm works. But when you want to bring that to, let's say, your startup, you want to commercialize them, you need a new data set. So you need to retrain it on data that you're allowed to use for commercial purposes. In some cases, it's very hard to do, but there are commercially available data sets out there that you can do that on. But it's quite hard to find. But you can train it initially on the open data just to verify that it works. And number 3 is presenting to VCs at conferences or to external stakeholders considered a form of disclosure. Yes. So if you present to anybody who's outside of McGill, it's considered an external disclosure. Does people within your own lab? Not really, because we're all part of the McGill organization. You may not want to do that personally, but from a legal perspective, it's not considered disclosure. But yeah, to a VC, to conferences with other people, that's considered disclosure unless you have a confidentiality agreement. So that's something we do as well. If you want to speak to a company, we can set up an NDA, so then it's not considered disclosure. Dr. Labe?
Yeah, a great presentation. Quick question. So regarding, in order to initiate talks, do you actually need a report of invention to be filled beforehand, or do you also meet without report of information beforehand?
Yeah, so if you have something you're developing right now, it's a bit early, but you want to talk to somebody, yeah, fill a report of invention out. It doesn't have to be complete. And we'll just use that to create the NDA. And then when you have more information, we'll just put it on hold. When you have more information later on, we'll fill it out, and then we can do the patent search then.
So the NDA is to be able to talk to you.
No, not for us. So we're at McGill. So if you're talking to us about your device, it's not a disclosure. But if you want to talk to a a company, for instance.
Okay, I see. So this is why you would generate an NDA that can be used regarding that.
Yeah, correct.
And just a quick question regarding the general cost for spin-offs. Do you know in what is the actual amount required to get that on its feet?
What do you mean in terms of for like a
For
medtech company?
incorporation and creating an enterprise entity as a spin-off within McGill?
Well, I mean, we're not really going to provide funding to a particular company, but
James, you are muted. Can't hear you.
one second, let me just change my audio.
Can hear you now.
Okay, everything's good now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, first, starting a company is pretty cheap. You can register any company, I think it's like $250. But getting it off the ground takes a lot more. So you're gonna need to find investors. Typically for medical devices, like there's different rounds, right? You have pre-seed, then you have your seed round. You might have a second seed round.
But my question is more like, so you just need to add it to be incorporated for McGill to transfer the rights.
Oh, correct. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you don't need to have any infrastructures beside having an incorporation.
No. Because you're going to need the license in order to attract investors, right? So yeah, typically the startup has 0 to no value.
Thanks.
The real answer is you need $23 million to have an FDA type 2 device to market, and you need $94 million for an FDA type 3 device. You can start a company for $2,000 with a boilerplate like application for shares. Sorry, James. Just
no. You're 100% right. It takes 20+ million just to get something to market, but you don't necessarily have to raise the 20 million because you might want to sell the company off before that. So that's and it depends also on your funder, right? So VCs, there's different funds and they have different investment horizons. So if you have one that has a very short investment horizon of like, let's call it 3 or 5 years, they're expecting you to generate a certain amount of data, and then you're going to sell your company off. It's a one with a very long time horizon. You'll probably get more money, you'll be able to develop it longer. So that answer also depends on. You also really pick who your investors are for that particular reason.
So when we filed the patent through McGill, after that we have patent prosecution, and we were on our own in terms of patent prosecution. So does McGill help with the patent prosecution for other startups?
After licensing, whether it's with a startup, or whether it's with a startup or a company, we don't do any prosecution at that point. So it's on the company to handle that.
Okay.
Hey, James. Thanks for the presentation. Very good, actually. Very informative. Always good refresher. Just wondering about the trade secrets. So let's say you have a formula that you with ingredients that, let's say, that's already been patented and it's all patented by now. You put it together. I can understand you could patent the formula if it's unique, but if you go the route like you mentioned, Coke, where you have trade secrets, how do you avoid, let's say, how do you actually get it to the market when it comes to like disclosing at some point to an agency with regards to toxicity and so on? At that point, you would have to disclose at least the ingredients that you're using to make sure it's not toxic. How does that operate?
Yeah, so you're right. You have to disclose what it's made out of, but hopefully, just knowing the constituent ingredients is not enough for you to imitate it, right? So we know what's in Coke, right? You just read the ingredients on the back. Doesn't mean you know how to make it. So hopefully, I'm not saying this always in the case. Hopefully, you'll say it's made of this, this, and this. And this, this ingredient, it's non-toxic, or it's it's well known and it's tolerated, and we know the effects of this ingredient. But hopefully that's not enough for you to imitate it.
Mm.
But I mean, in the case of for drugs and stuff, I mean, they patent it, right? Because there's a lot of money in this industry, and they can try and reverse engineer it, right? I mean, with enough money, you can do it. So I would try and consider patenting it. There's a reason drug companies do it, and it's not because they want to.
Yeah, so we had an incident with media, actually, and we're developing our own culture media. And I guess at the end of the day, it was some people, they don't patent media, so they just provide trade secrets. So, you disclose what's inside, I guess, to amounts.
Yeah.
Or you don't disclose what's inside.
I'll give you an example of something we've done. So a researcher in engineering, he protected the particle, that composition of matter. We did not protect the method to create it. Because in this particular case, you already talked about it elsewhere, so it was disclosed. So we only protect in the US. So, US is a big market, but it's not, it doesn't have Europe and things like that where they really care about water quality. So we decided to protect the composition matter, but hey, he's the only one who knows how to make it. So if you want to do a license, you get the know-how.
Got it.
Yeah. Following Mike's question, when we developed the media, which was actually developed by Mike, and we had the formulation, but we wanted another company to make it, since we can't make it in our lab in huge batches. So when we approached Wyzen Bioproducts, they told us that they prefer it not be patented. They prefer a trade secret. And so that's what we went. We went with a trade secret, but like you said, anybody can reverse engineer if they are motivated.
So I see a question here from Joseph. So he said, amazing talk. If you're doing a master's thesis with Shriners as a McGill student, how do you go about IP? So this one's complicated because Shriners has their own IP policy. So it depends if you're doing this with somebody, if your supervisor is a co-inventor. If so, then we'll have to figure out whose IP policy it falls under. But generally speaking, if you're a McGill student who's working on your specific thesis, you would report it to McGill. So thesis work would be covered under IP policy. And then we can figure out which Shriners, how that works. So you're a McGill student, you report to McGill, and then we would do all that work on the back end with another institution. So the same thing works if let's say you have a collaborator in a different university, right? Well, who owns the IP? Well, you would report it to McGill, and then we get in contact with that university, and we figure out in the back end how the revenue is shared, who's going to take the lead, things like that. So no matter what, you'd still report to us.
That's really wonderful, James. Really wonderful talk, and I echo the comments. Really awesome, and for educating us about patent. And I think this is information that we need, especially in this day and time. So if there are no other questions, I'd like to thank James and thank everyone for attending the seminar. So thank you very much, James, and thank you everyone attending the seminar. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Take care.
All right.
Bye.